Okay, so this is the session you're in. It's first year retention, student performance information at Shawnee State University, and I'm glad you're here. A little background. I do this every slideshow. It hasn't gotten old yet, but I imagine it will at some point. That is just Microsoft clip art at the bottom. I did this at a Board of Trustees meeting, and they weren't as excited about it as I was, clearly. But I guess a little bit about me. My name's Chris Schaefer. I'm Sagittarius. I was in the Army for 9 years. I did 4 years at West Point. George Bush did his preemptive war speech at my graduation, which was exciting for us because a year later, I was in Baghdad as a platoon leader in a field artillery unit, did some staff work in the Army, got out. My West Point nominator had become governor, so I worked in the governor's office for 3.5 years. He lost, and then my hometown college, Shawnee State, called and said they'd like to rethink the way they do data. So if you read Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, I had a beginner's mind in about everything. So I found that to be pretty helpful, and so that's how I ended up where I am today. I hope that what you get out of this is a presentation of something that you can do immediately when you go back. I love a lot of presentations, but sometimes I'm really into it. Then they say, well, what'd you do? I'm like, well, we spent $250,000, and we implemented it. Then at that point, I just start picking up cans on the side of the road to figure out how we can do something like that. So I wanted to come up with something that I thought would be immediately practical and something that you can do already because you already have that information. So, okay. Like I said, I'm new to higher ed, but one thing I've noticed already, and I saw this in my other walks of life as well, is that education is important economically. In our area, the economics of the college, we're not just part of the economic milieu of the area, we are one of the drivers, along with the hospital. And if many of you are from small town areas, that's probably something you've seen in your communities as well. And it's also about the economics of our students. We serve a very poor population. I'll get into that in a second. But students are spending a lot of money for something that kind of in the general media, it's my last bullet, sometimes says, well, is a college degree even worth it? And there's a lot of doubt about that. And I think that it is for a lot of reasons. But college and education itself costs a lot of money. So I think we should be good stewards of it. It's about access. Who should have access to an education? Should it just be a certain type of people with certain economic characteristics, or should it be more open access? Are we providing access to people who don't have potentially the academic preparation to be successful? So it's a complicated thing. And now we see things like success and accountability all over the place. A lot of funding formulas and states have went toward these types of metrics. For us, we're an open access institution, but our funding formula is now a success-based funding formula. So we're competing against other schools that have a lot of selectivity, so we have to do the very best we can with the students that we have. So it's complicated, and I think you all obviously realize that. So where I work, Shawnee State University in Portsmouth, Ohio. If you drove south of Columbus and hit Kentucky and then backed up 60 feet, because Kentucky owns most of the Ohio River. Ohio barely owns any of it. So we're right on the border of Ohio and Kentucky on the river in the Appalachian region of the state. So it's very hilly. We get a lot of bad stereotypes in the national media, but it's not a bad place to live, make a life. We have a lot of low educational attainment. If you look at census data, which I'm sure someone in this room does, probably most of you, our educational attainment rate for college success and in terms of degrees earned is about half the national average. And that's true for most of the counties where we get most of our students from. We get 52% of our students from our top 20 school districts. High poverty, 70% Pell, give or take year to year, 30% zero expected family contribution. So these are students who don't have a lot of time. And if any of you understand how you measure graduation rates, if you have students and they have a hiccup and they're on some sort of aid and they can't get through, for us, the timer stops. And that's a big deal to the students, and it's a big deal to the school. Our students reflect the demographics of our region, and we offer a wide range of degrees. So we have associate degrees, we have bachelor degrees, we have some folks who probably accidentally walked on campus and decided they want to go to college that day. We have some students who are studying for pre-med. In fact, one of my running buddies and swimming buddies is a doctor that went to the college that I work at, and he finished number 2 in his class at medical school, MD program. So we have a wide range of students. So, okay, so we need something that can help us identify where we can make a big difference with our students, and it also needs to be basically free. That was my quote. So what do we have to work with? Well, one of the things when I started, I said, all right, what information do we have available already? And one of those items was what we call our 15th day report. It's essentially our fall census information, the students who are on our campus in the fall. And someone somewhere on your campus, maybe you, has this information. If you know who they are, you should be their friend, because this information is very helpful. So what we did was, and this I'll explain it more in a second, is that we essentially just stacked them on top of each other. And each term we have about 4,400 students on average, at a high of 4,687 and a low of about, I don't know, 4,100 or so. So what we did was, and you can't really see it, and it looks kind of ridiculous, and there's a wave in that screen. So it's taking longer to cross. See the light, it's like bouncing almost. But this is how many lines of data were in it. So what we did was, we took our fall reports, so the fall of 7, the fall of 8, the fall of 9, the fall of 10, and we smashed them on top of each other. I use a lot of really action-y words. It's like Batman comic book or something. But we smashed them on top of each other, and that was great. And then we attached other information to the side, like ACT, because what we wanted to do, we wanted to create a situation where the report itself was fine. It was fall census, but students go to high schools. They have genders. They have majors. They have grades, some of them barely, but they have characteristics about them we can study and analyze. So what went into our report? Most of the report was out of our Cognos database. I had mixed feelings about it, but we pulled it in and we put them in. We took the existing reports and just stacked them on top of each other, and then we attached some information, some directory information, some high school information, some GPA information, some ACT major information. And what's interesting about that is when you have a file that large, you have some conditions you have to be aware of. The first one is, in the 2007 file, which was the first year of this file, you could be a senior, so you might only pop in once. But if you were a freshman in 2007, you might appear multiple times. And some things about you will stay the same, but some things will be different. Your highest ACT score, for example, should stay the same. Your major could change. Your GPA will change. So you kind of get a sense of what's happening over time. So some other things we added is a thing called a quadrant. And if any of you were on a higher ed call in February or March, I hosted a webinar. We went over this quadrant thing for about 2 hours. I actually had people go bring me Gatorade, and it lasted so long. It was intense. So we added this quadrant thing, which was, I'll explain in a second, but it was just, I'll explain it right now. It was first-time freshmen, and we looked at every student, if they stayed and had over a 2, if they had under a 2 and left, or if they had under a 2 and stayed and under a 2 left. So there were 4 possibilities you could be. And I learned that at a conference from a guy named Peter Dietschy and Scott Swale of EPI, and I really liked it. So we added that to this file. We added a return or not file. So we just saw if they were here in 7, are you also in the 8 file? If you are, you're a yes, and if you're not, you're a no. And you could be a no because you graduated. We didn't fuse it with graduation data initially, but we just looked at each individual file to see if they were a yes, no repeater. And I'm describing the process we did when we first made it. I may do this differently now with new skills. And then we added what I call Tableau time. And I call it that because it makes me remember it, but all it was a date. So we added just a fake date for each one of those terms. So the fall 2007 file didn't know it was going to be hanging out with fall 2008. So the name of the fall 2007 file was fall 2007 file. But when we started attaching them, on top of each other, we needed a way to differentiate them. So we gave them all a fake date. It was the 15th of September, and that's because we made it on the 15th of September. So the terms change. The 15th day of the term this year was in August, but for the purposes of this project, that's what we did. So we'll get right at this. Someone took a picture, and I wanted this to be my picture for this session, but they picked the kind of the goofy one, which I like, but I like this picture too. So this is me thinking stoically. I was actually in a video for Tableau, and I did a screenshot of it, so I thought they'd like it for that reason. But, okay, I wonder if our small size means that students improve during their stay at Shawnee State University, because that's what I heard. I heard, well, we're a small school, so when students come, our low student-to-faculty ratio, all these things make it really, our students get much better after they arrive because of this one-on-one attention. It's kind of like saying, my wife is tiny. She's like 5'1", but she's not necessarily going to be a gymnast. I mean, she has the attributes to maybe be a gymnast more than I would because I'm tall and lanky. And I found that was something that was thought about our campus. Our size meant that we were going to be able to do something that we may or may not have been good at doing. So, sets. It's loud. So this is what it looked like at the end. Now this is dummy data. Everyone always says this. This is dummy data. And the data I'm going to show you is dummy data that makes us look better and worse in certain circumstances. But this is how we used a set to analyze, for example, first-time freshmen. Let me do this one instead. First-time freshmen. Oh, I'm sorry. This should say less than a 3.0. So these are the first-time freshmen that had a less than a 1-point GPA. And then by using these magic Tableau dates, and by magic I mean just dates, you can see in 2007 there were 242 first-time freshmen in that file that had a GPA of less than a 1.0 based on a Tableau bin of cum GPA. And you can see the next term how many of them were left. Not very many. Now, this is dummied up, but it's, you know, you could tell who they're trying. If this was a movie, you could tell the actors were trying to portray here. So you can see that most of the students did not do well at all, and most of them were actually gone. In fact, and this could be the same student right here every term, because a student could be here, and they could have went here, and they could have went here. They can only be in one year grade combination, but students can bounce around in this. But only one, potentially only one person, maybe 4 separate people one time, ever had a cum GPA above a 3. Now, if you look at the inverse of that, of the students who had a 3 or a 4, and just the way the Tableau does bins, if you chop GPA up by 0, 1, by ones, you get 0 to 1, 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, and then literally a 4.0. So the folks with a 3 or a 4, the opposite. Only 1 or 2, at the most 4 of them ever got below a 2.0. And then I'm not sure what happened here. Maybe this person just quit caring. We can also use this methodology for looking how they progress on our college campus. So in our sheet, one of the columns was their class. So first-time freshmen, sophomores, juniors, seniors. You put the years at the top. You add your set. So I can see the students with a 0 to a 2.0, there were 400, again fake, but in the neighborhood. Only 7 of them became sophomores the next year. But that has huge implications for your campus, because if you're trying to measure a 6-year graduation rate for a bachelor's degree, and only 7 people out of 400-ish were able to progress, that's not very good. Or the ones that stayed, most of them were still freshmen. And that could have been because of remediation. It could have been because of a light course load. They could have been advised not to take a full load. We have banded tuition, so if you have between 12 and 18 hours, it's the same price. So these students could have taken 12 and 12, so they have 24 hours, not enough to be a sophomore. So right away, you can tell that there's not much movement. Where we produce this together, and by together, me doing it and you watching, I guess, making the slideshow. And here's how the folks with over a 2 did. Almost the exact opposite. We have some that became juniors and seniors the very next fall, and that's because they probably took some high school courses and some classes, and their first time freshman year they were a freshman, and then they were ever what their credit hours said they were the next time. So you can see almost the exact opposite. Most of them became sophomores, and what you also notice is kind of like a linear line. I guess it's a linear line, it's alliteration. You can see how it's growing the way you'd hope it would grow. A lot of density, a little less, little clumping, and then a lot of folks disappear, and we hypothesize, and I can do it with another file, they actually graduated. So you can see two very different stories based on how our students did. So there's one more. Here's 0 to a 1.66. So I can see there were 348-ish, plus or minus 20 or 30. And then you can see how they did. And this is actually how we keep track of them, because our graduation GPA you have to have, and I assume it's the same with most of you, is over a 2.0. So by using this GPA, it gives us a metric that we can work off of. Then we can use this same workbook and reach out and say, all right, who are the folks this fall that are in our danger zone? I like really fancy words. For the same reason I listen to movie soundtracks making these. It makes everything much more melodramatic. So I add these Tableau words and stuff like that. So, all right, here's the opposite. Students with a 3.5 their first semester, only one person, one time in all the years of this file, 7 years of this file, ever dropped into that danger zone. So right away, the myth that people, we move them up radically, I don't think it's true based on the data. They either disappear or they kind of hobble along through the system. So that's refocused the way that we intervene in students' behavior. So I am going to show you how we did that. So here's my file. Right here, I call this the all-inclusive file, because that's what the person who made it for me called it, so I kept it. It's gigantic. It's 30,000 lines of data. which for us was gigantic. I realize it's not really gigantic, but this is fake. So if you look at it, see I multiplied and divided by random numbers and stuff like these 0.5. But it was important to have consistency. There's some zip codes, there's some major information. If we keep going over, you can see departments. Here's the year, there's the Tableau date, if they returned or not. So you can see how this is set up, just a lot of stuff. And some of it's actually sort of the vestigial tale of before I had Tableau, and I keep it to remind me of how miserable my life was when I was trying to. So you see, it's kind of pointless, but I had ones and zeros, and we're counting things in pivot tables. So I keep it, so whenever I get sad, it reminds me of it could have been a lot worse. So if you upload the file, it looks like this. There we go. So here's my dimensions, and you can tell the ones which were the vestigial tale. They're kind of goofy, but I think I cleaned up most of them because it's a dummy. So there's the 15th date. I've got to change the data type, turn it into a date. Okay? And then I have my number of records, which is the number of students. Now remember, a student can repeat themselves multiple times. So the first thing I do when I'm making this, I guess I should stop fidgeting with my cards now, but they were a good friend. Okay, so let's look at our records. Here we go. That many students. So that's our population. Some of you may have things that look the same. And I love this fake date thing because then you can do really neat things like, I don't know, here's degree type that they're seeking, so I can see here's bachelor's versus certificates versus grad programs. So once you build it, it's really handy for all sorts of things. But I'm going to make a thing that I call set generation. Again, for the same reason I listen to movie soundtracks. I always call my first little tab here, or worksheet, the set generation. Typos. I hate typing in front of people. I really do. Okay, set generation. Okay, so how do you make a set generator? Well, the first thing you have to do is get rid of everything. It's funny when you watch people do this. You're like, I would not do it. I would right-click remove, or I would clear the whole sheet up here. So it's you find yourself thinking those things. At least I do. Okay, so I'm going to make my set generator. So the first thing I have to do is find the student ID, which is the new fake student ID. Here's see how the math, I have these weird numbers. So there's my IDs. Okay, so now I'm going to pick a condition. Now remember, we have 2007 to 2012. I want to pick a freshman class that I can track their changes over time. So I'm going to make a filter. I want to drop in class. Now the key in this is you want to make sure there's nothing in this but the ID numbers, because then it screws up your set. So I'm going to click for freshman. I'm going to quick filter. Oops. I'm not using a mouse. I'm using this little tab thing. Okay, first time freshman, 2008. Now I want to make a condition for them. I want to reproduce what we made earlier. So I'm just going to do by cum GPA. So there's my cum GPA. I'm going to make a bin. Create a bin. I wish they called them baskets. I think that would be a better term. But I'm going to make a bin, and I always name the bin whatever size I'm using it to chop it up by. So there we go. There's my bin. I'm going to right-click this. So now I want to look at people with less than a 2.0 GPA that were first-time freshmen in 2008. So my set generation is complete. So I'm going to click this. I do this little wand thing. I don't know why I do this, but it seems like it works. If I click it, right-click, select all, a couple times, right-click. I want to say Hocus Pocus Alamagokas because I watched that show as a kid. So here we go. First-time freshman, fall of 2008. What are they? Less than 2.0. So what happens is, this went back in time. So in the past, we saved their cum GPAs at the term that we pulled it from. So this is the cum GPA that they had at the end of that term. So it's consistently the one that they had at the end of this term that they had. So, okay, that made no sense. Yeah, so in this particular file, because we're doing fall to fall to fall, it's looking at the GPA that they earned essentially that entire year for this file. Now, we've caught up to real time. The first year I was there, we didn't have this. So now we pull it, like we pulled this exact same report 2 weeks ago, and the cum GPA was their cum GPA as of last Tuesday. So we can analyze stuff in real time now. So the cum GPA of the sophomores is their total cum GPA of every term when I pulled it this fall. In this case, we were tying it to the entire academic year that they had before what they were that year. It'll make more sense when you see it, I think, in action. So there's my set. There we go. So I just leave my set generator alone because then it makes it really easy to analyze it. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and just make the good group. Not the good group. It's not a theological question. I'm going to make the high-performing group. Same thing. Select all. The wand. Make a set. Create set. This is going to be FFs. Fall 2008. 2.0 or greater GPA. Okay, so I have two different groups.
Can I just ask a quick question
Sure.
again about the cum GPA? These are brand new freshmen in fall 08, so is this their GPA in the fall 08?
Well, for this, yeah, for this file, so when I pulled it for this fall, because it was real-time GPA, most of the first-time freshmen and the transfers had no GPA on our campus. They hadn't loaded into the system yet. But because this file was done after the fact, we purposely tied them to a particular point in time. In our case, it was the cum GPA of the year that they're represented in this file. So if they were a first-time freshman in 2008, it represents the GPA that those people in that file had earned that year. Yeah, in that year. Like I said, the beauty of this in real time is I can now analyze this, like I said, in real time. So when I click juniors in this risky category, we send them an email immediately. We send them to the deans, and they can work with it. But what you lose is you have a bunch of zero GPAs for the new students, unless, in our case, they had some high school credit. So now I have my two sets. I'm going to leave it alone. So let's just see how they did. So you add your year, and then we add first-time freshman, less than a 2.0 GPA. And now I'm going to hit the number of records. So there you go. Can you see that? Barely. I'll make it into a bar chart. And I'll flip it. It's like a middle finger almost kind of sticking out. So there you go. So this is the total number of students that met that condition in our fake file, 472. And look at the next file, how many are left? 101, and 52, and 37, and 25. And with a quick calculation, if you wanted to, you could go into it, and you could drop in the number of records, and you could do percent difference, quick table calculation, percent difference, and you can see how many we're down 80%, so look at 20-something% retention rate. So you can do stuff like that with it. So now we can see how many were still left. But because this thing is structurally sound, if I turn this back into, let's say, this kind of a chart, now you see 10 were there in 2007, so I assume that they took some courses at Shawnee State or something, but you do have this when you work on this end. I'm going to look at those students, and I want to see what their GPAs were. So now I can drop in that cum GPA bin. Remember, it was less than 2, so 313 have between a 0 and a 1, and 159 had between a 1 and a 2. And then you can see exactly what they did afterwards. When the one that you saw earlier, I made one of these kind of a charts. I think I added an extra word in there when I described that. Let me stretch it out. It's hard to stretch these out sometimes. Okay, so there you go. Make it bigger. So there's my students. Most of the folks who had less than a 2 actually had less than a 1 from our set, if you remember that. I'm going to take cum GPA bin, drop it into the color. I'm going to make this really dark green because it's good. This is not as good. This will be bad, red. This will be not as bad, pink. And then blue in the middle, kind of, but it's not really in the middle. It's more of a median, I guess. So that's our students who performed poorly their first-time freshman term. There's the numbers. And now with the analysis function in Tableau, it's really handy because you can add up, you can add up the total number of each one of these, although it doesn't mean as much on the row side, but the column side, you can see how many people there were. That's what we saw in the beginning. In fact, I'm going to get rid of the row thing because it's kind of confusing. Okay, so there's our numbers. So that's the overall retention, if you will, or students stayed on campus, and you can see how many moved. And again, a similar scenario. Very few of them ever earned above a 3.0. So I think that's kind of interesting. Yes?
So
Well, we could. I mean, if we wanted to, we could create a combined set and look at freshmen in general. Because once you make these sets, I try to make them in a way that they can keep adding to each other. So in theory, every student had between a 0 and a 4.0 at Shawnee State. I could right-click this, create a combined set, and add these two together, and now it would be all the freshmen. Then I could drop in, and I could analyze the folks who were retained or not using this set methodology. Now, we actually have a field that says return or not, and it's really easy to do, but you can use this to see how they move through the campus. So I'm going to duplicate this. This is how I ended up with 100 tabbed Tableau sheets. I'm going to get rid of it. And when I get rid of it, it's going to be everybody in all circumstances all the time. So that's everybody. But now if I drop in this, these are the students who had over a 2 in 2008. And I can see, again, only one of them ever dropped below a 1.0 while they were on campus. So this is a really nice way if you want to see clearly how they're doing and you want to see how they're progressing. Let me go back to the students who did not perform as well as we would have liked. So if I drop them in, I want to see how they're progressing by class. So now I'm going to leave the GPA bin, and I'm going to drop in their class. Now I'm going to get rid of, I think I'm going to get rid of some of the ones like non-degree and whatnot, and just keep the biggies. So we got freshmen, first-time freshmen, juniors, and seniors. And I'm going to sort it in the way that you would expect it to see. So the first one will be freshmen. This is, again, one of those circumstances where people probably would do this differently, and they're cringing right now. So there's that. Here's up. Move it up. So now I have a document that shows, again, that's our first number, the 472. I can see the next year of the folks who had less than a 1, all of them were freshmen. So in the very next fall, only four people were in a sophomore, at a sophomore level of performance and had over a 2.0 at a 472. And then if you wanted to figure out who they were, what high school they went to, now you can just grab them, make more sets. You keep making sets on top of sets on top of sets. But I think this is a really interesting thing to see, is just how, and again, this is dummied a little bit, but you can start to see just how few people are progressing in the way that you'd hope that they could progress in optimal circumstances. Now I'm going to take those folks out, and I'm going to add the greater than a 2.0 GPA. Drop them in. Now look at that. Look at the difference. Remember, it's 2 to 3. Most of them are in the 3 range. And then the next fall, 195 were sophomores with over a 3.0. So a lot of movement. So even though 2.0 is the sort of the line of demarcation, a lot of movement toward the negative side and a lot of people sliding toward this other group. And then once you build them, you can start to analyze what's important about them. So if I just want to see this group, these are fake ACT scores. Let's just drop in ACT. Let's make this an average. What's the average ACT of the people that were in our super good group? 26.4. Yeah, so they're above our average of 20. It's quite a bit. So you can start to figure out exactly what the characteristics are of some of the folks you're trying to find. So I really like this methodology because it gives you an ability. Once you can analyze these trends over time. Again, this is data you already have. You can analyze these trends over time, but you can also see their progression, their movement, and their success. If you wanted to take the cum GPA thing out of the color, let's add pie chart. Let's take away average ACT. So there we go. Let's drop in, what do they call it? They call it sex in this file. It's usually gender. So let's add gender. So now we can see the gender potentially of, not potentially, there's no potential to it. You can see exactly, you can see most of the people in these groups are of a certain gender or not. So it's a really nice way to figure out different things about the groups. And once they're built, since it's tied to the rest of the file forever, where do most of the students with this high GPA come from? Well, I can take them, I can grab them, I can double-click school postal code, and now I'm going to have a map, not online, but I will have a map. That's Ohio, if you can't tell. Well, you can't tell, so it's a big, you've never seen this before. So here we go, offline. So zoom controls. This is where they're from. Got it, thank you. Check this in. All right, that's where they come from. We could see what their majors were. We could see all sorts of things about these sets and analyze them over time. And then once you build them sequentially, like I said, you can combine them in a first-time freshman class. So I think that's all interesting. because I like Tableau and I like student data. Okay, so there's another question. This is my child. I shamelessly dressed her up like this. So another question I heard on campus was, does the same methodology work when discussing movements in and out of majors? Because one of the things I've heard a lot from people on campus is, well, this major or this department or this whatever is tough. People who can't hack it here, they go here. Or our best students, they go there. So it's a lot of stuff like that. And there's a lot of interest in that. The other thing she tells me all the time is we sing that song from the movie about one of the 3 states of water one more time. If you have a child under 5 as a female, you've probably sung that song a lot. So you can't use solid liquid gas jokes very often, so why not today? Okay, so here's another chart. Same methodology. You'll see it, then we'll put it together. So this is not, again, not exact, but these were business majors in 2013. And you can see what they were the previous term by department. So most of the folks, if they were here, again, 376, so you can assume the rest were new students, but you can see exactly which departments they were in as they moved into the business department. This is actually the opposite. And you can see these were the first-time freshmen of business, and you can see how many of them were retained, so we lost about half. And then only 1/3 of the original students were in business, but there wasn't a lot of movement other places on campus. So, demo, double demos later. I put it all together. Okay, so let's do the demo for that. Okay, so the process works the same. Back to my set generation device, otherwise known as a filter with a couple pieces of student identification information. So I'm going to grab, should I start seniors moving in or freshmen moving out? Yes. So they can change their majors all the time, but what we lock in when we report is based on the 15th day of the term or the common data set. Yeah, their first year. So they're locked in. Whatever they were on the 15th day is what we report as their major as a first-time full-time freshman. So here's my set generator. So one of the requests from the crowd was first-time freshmen. So there's all first-time freshmen in 2008. And the reason I pick 8 and not 7 is that there were just more students. So I'm going to pick a major. Okay, so I'm going to add another quick filter. Here's all of our majors. I'll bring it over here. Let's pick a major. I'm going to pick something kind of big. Actually, I'll pick our digital simulation and design. This is free advertising, and it was ranked 7th and then 11th in the country the last couple of years. So I'm going to mention it. But as you can see, it's not very big. So first-time freshman who picks digital simulation and design in 2008, I'm going to grab their IDs. So you can double check over here. So I make sure GPA got all of them. I have all of my mom's listening. I have all of them in. So I have first-time freshman, 2008. Good to go. Select all. Wave the wand. Go back. Create a set. So this is digital simulation game and design FF's fall 2008. Let's see what happened to them. Because I'm kind of lazy, I am just going to duplicate this one so I can keep the year, although that would not have been much work at all. I don't know why I felt the need to do that. So, in fact, I'm just going to go back. So let's pick first-time freshman, or pick the year, pick the number of records. So now it's everybody again. And now I'm going to drop in my new set, digital simulation, game, and design. So in that year, there were 54 people who met that criteria, and then this is what they did afterwards. But now if I drop in major description, 2008 shows those 54. You can see exactly where they went to on campus the rest of their time in this giant file. So I can see of the folks who stayed. Now I'm going to add up the columns. So 54. So 34 stayed. Our average is about a 53 first-time freshman retention rate. So it's a little bit above average. And they kind of hang on for a while. But some of them leave, but not as many as you think. Now, it's not surprising that 4 of them went to fine arts because fine arts is a partner program with it. And there's a digital simulation and design that's more physics, math-based. And then there's also one that is more artsy-based. And they draw a nice left brain, right brain picture. So it's not surprising. These are probably the folks who weren't good at math and then switched over to here. But, we can check that because in my file, I have a math ACT score. I can drop that into the text. turn it into an average, and I will tell you. So, hey, what do you know? Look at that. For the folks who picked fine arts, had an average math GPA subscore of 21.5 compared to the folks who stayed in digital gaming simulation and design who had a 23. I mean, you're doing with averages. Our average is a 20. Our upper 75th percentile is 23. Bottom 25th is 17. So, you know, that's above average. So we can see. And then I'm very curious how they did. Oh, I've got that CUME GPA bin thing. I'll drop that in. So let's find the fine arts folks. Okay. All right. That's interesting. Oh, very interesting. So that's not shocking. I guess people with higher math score had a higher grade. But you can keep doing this over and over and over again if you want to see movement in and out of any particular thing on campus. I like this because it's basically free, besides Tableau, which is not free, but I think it's definitely worth the money. I mean, we essentially renew for $700 every year with renewal fees, and we get all this out of it, so I like it a lot. But I like this methodology because you can see movement in and out of a major, and you can start to try to pinpoint why do some folks switch, why do some folks stay. I'm going to pick something a little more broad this time because that's a small major. Go back to my generator. I'm going to pick teacher education, so early childhood, educational studies. This will be big. A lot of people in Appalachia want to be, oh, I got one, sorry. We had this program called Pre-Health Science, which was kind of a holding tank for our folks who could not get into our competitive nursing programs. We had this thing called Pre-Health Science, and a lot of people end up in something like that, or at least they used to. Not anymore. We have a solution for that. So let's look at Pre-Health Science freshmen, 2008. Let's see what happens to them. Do they get into nursing? I've actually never done this exact same thing in this exact same time, so we'll all learn together. 272 people pick that. Now, we recommend they don't stay very long in this, so let's see what happens. Pre-health, FFs, fall, 2008. Pick it. I have a new set. Now, I love these kind of sets because, for example, like I said before, 52% of our high school students come from our top 20 school districts. So now I can drop school name in, and I can tell you there's all members. If I hit number of students, I can hit number of distinct students because it's going to essentially double count students who stay more terms the way this is set up. So I could do a count of distinct students, but most of them, these are all local high schools. So I think that's kind of neat. So let's go back to our pre-health science. Drop them in. Add the Tableau date. Copyright infringement not intended. So we have that. Number of records. So that's that 272 you saw earlier right there, right? 272. 136, 95, and then it drops off pretty quick. Let's see what they did major-wise. Drop this into the row. We find pre-health science, alphabetical order. Let's find nursing. So 272, the next fall, 10 were in nursing. That's not a very good rate. Where did they end up? Well, a lot of them stayed in pre-health science. They must have thought if they had another term, they could get better grades, they'd be more competitive, because it's a very competitive program to get into this nursing. Because, I mean, you don't want to go to the hospital and watch them put they're sticking you with IVs and stuff. You want to make sure they do a good job. So it's very competitive. But look at this. Some of them are still pre-health science 4 years later. Now, because of this data, we fixed that. Because, like, why are people doing this? We were able to aggregate this stuff in the system, and now you can only be in it 2 years as a declared pre-health science major. Let's make sure, let's just keep pre-health science, now that I've made this group, keep only, and let's see what their classes were. If I drop in class, okay, so there we go, 272, first-time freshman. I'm going to drag this around so that it looks like it did, or it looks like it should. Okay, so luckily only one person, a couple years later, was a junior and stayed pre-health science. So most of them had got the clue that maybe they should try something else before that, but you can see, let's see how well that student did. So let's just drop in something like average CUME GPA into the text. And let's make this to an average. Make this into an average. Oh my goodness. It's embarrassing. Make this into an average. Okay. I don't know. So their grades weren't terrible. I mean, they had a 2.86 GPA by the time they were a junior. So they must have been good enough they thought they could make it, but evidently a more competitive cohort came in every time and they couldn't get in. So back to the slideshow. Double demo. I didn't yell it as loud because it was not, the font was smaller. So double demo. Double demo. So I watched the, I got some of the ideas for this watching the Dirty Hot Sets thing. And I'd not used sets very much before. And what I liked about it was the idea that you can use it. I imagine, like, with those hammers when you hit the anvil in the wood and it splits. I kind of view sets like that. They help you keep splitting data different directions. But I'm going to make a combined set. So these are first-time freshmen, right? So I'm going to say, and I picked the same years on purpose so I could do this. Let's find pre-health science. Let's create a combined set. Pre-health science, first-time freshman, fall 2008, that also had less than a 2.0 GPA. Then you can create a combined set, because in theory they're all first-time freshmen. I'm not going to rename it. That's just set number one. And I'm going to go back to my little sheet. Back to my little sheet. Okay, now let's take them out and let's drop our combined set in. So now this is just the pre-health science folks that sorry, didn't take. But you can make these combined sets by combining the sets you already make, and you can start to analyze more and more and more conditions. But again, I guess to recap all of this before we start going into some questions, is that what I like about this is that once you make them, they're live forever. You can look at the information in terms of progression. You can see movement in. If we wanted to do movement, we did movement out with freshmen. If we wanted to look at juniors or seniors, or you can make a group of, like, let's say upper class or lower class, you could pick a major and a year, and you can see who came into it. And then you have all these other factors, and you can analyze the different conditions that these students, exhibit. And you can really start to see the flow of your students. And for us, and you saw, this is not the actual numbers, but you saw what it looked like when you have the folks, when only 4 people who were academically challenged their first semester become a sophomore the next year. That's something you have to address, and we did. Or conversely, if I had another hour or two to talk, what I would show you is we figured out exactly where you can start to make a difference with our students, at what point you can start to make a difference. So it helps you figure out intervention points. And then because the sets are essentially autonomous, you can check majors and you can check local areas. And this is really helpful when we go visit local high schools, because we'll just make a set of something combined with the local high school and say, here's the majors they pick, here's where they struggle, here's ACTs that make a difference, et cetera. But this is something that you should be able to do in a couple hours. The hardest part is just structuring the data on top of each other and adding that year. You could actually probably do that in a calculation of some sort, but it's been very important for us. So, are there any questions? Would anyone like to see something? Yes.
That was 2 questions. So, now my question is...
You're paying attention.
Yeah.
That's good.
Question is, how did you communicate this out to other people on campus, your president? How did it go, especially sort of busting the myth about we're a small school, small students do that?
Well, sometimes it's how you tell it. So it was an opportunity. So when we looked at the information, we realized that if you looked at that information, it wasn't necessary. The less than a 2 folks, in a lot of cases, were actually less than a 1. So we started to identify that as an opportunity. So the folks with less than a 1, for example, did so poorly, we started focusing on the 1 to a 2 in a more, I guess, unified capacity. So that was one thing. But in a lot of cases, they had just never seen it presented, and I'm sure you all run into this if you use Tableau. I've never seen information like this before, and they hadn't, because we didn't have Tableau. We had pivot tables in Excel and whatnot, or we had reports that people may or may not have read. So people were generally pretty supportive, because again, in our funding formula and the way that we get funded by the state of Ohio, it's important for us that every student succeed. Outside of the funding formula, if our students don't make it, they may not be able just to go to another college. There's not one nearby within most of the driving distance of our students. And they have a lot of academic risk. So I think a lot of them are making sacrifices, working 1 or 2 jobs or sleeping weird hours. There's a lot of stuff that they're trying to do. So everyone wanted to honor that sacrifice that they were making and trying to do the very best we could to identify the potential roadblocks in the system. And this was really the first step in doing it, but it was pragmatic enough. We'd actually recreate a lot of these charts with the deans or with the provost, and we'd look at it, and when they saw it being created, they could see that there was no funny business. It was because it was our census information, there was already buy-in. Because when I started, people would say, well, the data is never the same. When I ask this day, it's this. When I ask this day, it's this. I said, well, it's because it's different. That's why it's not the same. Because it's, you ask a different question. Or in a lot of cases, and many of you probably run into this situation too, you're using something on a common data set, you're using a fixed point in time. So I purposely picked this 15th day report, which for us is our fall census, because at least in the beginning, everyone believed that that part was right. You might think the rest of it was crazy, but at least when you look at the number that I had on my chart and the number that we reported, they were the same. So that built some initial credibility. We were kind of moving our way through. So do you have a question, sir?
Yeah. I was wondering if you could speak a little more about interventions you identify for the strike on students based on the data.
So one of the things that, so we also have these CUME GPA groups, and I didn't reproduce it on this one because you saw it was raw when we started working, but we put our students in these grade groups. And then, like I said, I worked in the governor's office before this. I saw the ways that people communicate with people in those kind of arenas. And we started putting students in these groups. Instead of everything to everybody all at once, it was once we locked these grade groups in, they became a way to communicate with people very differently. For example, our president wanted to institute something called the success curriculum. It was an idea of extra classes, not classes, academic classes, but financing, budgeting and how to study, and we had guest speakers and stuff. So what we did was we started with our 2 lowest grade groups, and then we actually used quantiles after that to figure out the exact number, because we could only hold 120, but we used that as a methodology. But what I found is, and I repeat myself over and over again. You've heard me talk for an hour, and you probably witnessed it already. I don't know I do it when I do it. It's kind of a problem. But I say the same thing over and over and over again. Like, let's look at it in the grade groups. Let's look in the grade groups. What do the grade groups say? We have new grade groups, brand new grade groups. I mean, I'll use these things all the time. In fact, something this is just an idea that we're working toward, but even when you're thinking about applying, we're thinking about how can we start this in the beginning? What's the value articulation? So I'm a student with these conditions. Everything stems from that initial way that we kind of cluster you. And what's nice about that, at least with the interventions, like with the question earlier about this fall and the problem with the GPAs not being updated because they don't have GPAs yet, but everyone else does. So 25% of our campus is first-time freshmen. Everybody else is everybody else. So with these grade groups, as an example, we have first-time freshmen, we have freshmen, sophomores, and juniors that are in this risk group. I just go in Tableau. This is not exactly how I do it because these groups aren't our grade groups, but all I would do is I would say, all right, let's look at the fall. Let's pick a year. How about the fall of 2000? Pretend this is 2014, 2011. Here's my classes. I'm going to flip it. Now, this is not in the right order. I do number of records. I make a bar chart. It's a bar chart. I hate when it does that. I don't understand why it doesn't. Okay, there we go. That looks even worse. Holy smokes. I can really do this. Believe in me, and I'll believe in you. Okay, so there's my classes. And if I just wanted to see, for example, the underclass, so let's say freshmen, I'm not going to do freshmen, first-time freshmen, juniors, sophomores, seniors. I'm going to take first-time freshmen because if this was this fall, we wouldn't be able to analyze it. Now, it's not in the right order. Remember my CUME GPA bin? Now I drop it in, and now let's pretend our risk group is really this group. It would be the other one. So right now we have on our campus 205 people who are at risk. So then I could take that, I could flip it over, I could drop in their name. I won't, even though it's fake. I have some really funny fake names, but I'm not going to show them to you. So there they are. That's the people. What major were they in? What was their department? There's their department. So then you have an instantaneous tool. So in some case, it's the tool itself, but it's also preparing the mind to think about the data in that way. So it's helped us. And then we start to use that, and you saw the sets today, but then we start tracking them over time. And then once you see how poorly or excellently they do, it informs your decision-making process. But this is all coming off of one Excel spreadsheet. So we get a lot of utility out of it. It was close. You go first. You want to go first? We haven't done this side yet. Yeah, we found that too, because like for example, the state measures first-generation college students in Ohio, and the number of first-generation college students on the 15th day of our term is much higher as a percentage later. But I guess the purpose of today's was more to show just the stark contrast of the students churning their way through the system to set the table for the discussions that needed to happen. So we've seen a lot of that same literature, but our system, because it's just grabbed on the 15th day of that term, we don't track it like that. But you could use that same process just later date.
No, it's brilliant. We're in the same place right now. Just because we're trying to pilot it with essentially different departments we have to be on board, and the faculty has to say we're going to load grade into the system as it's coming in, and then there has to be some sort of intervention strategy. So if we notice that students we aren't doing very well, then there's some sort of a reach out strategy. So we have to involve student services, academic services. It's a lot of heavy lifting. So just curious if anyone had gone down that road, so like a step further from this, and if so, what was the experience like? I'm judging my silence.
Yeah, like I said, for us, it was just trying to set up this was the groundwork, this and the quadrants. So if you saw that 2-hour Gatorade infused webinar in February or March, that was the idea of the quadrants, which was just a freshman level analysis.
Very
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. You wanted to go.
Oh, it's okay. Okay. I'm from Canada as well, and you were talking about, just to reference your statement, you had assignment marks that you were tracking?
No, we were trying. This is kind of where I was hoping to go with it. And I was just more curious, kind of if anyone has gone there, kind of what were some of the roadblocks? If it was administrative, if it was faculty, or if it was technical things. Because that's where we'd like to go.
Oh, okay. For us, we don't have a mandatory declaration date for our
Yeah.
majors, so we've just been looking at, are we losing more students who take, 2 to 3 years to finally decide what they want to do versus students that might pick and switch around, so that's what we've been looking at. But I just had a question as well for, I don't know if you have any students that will maybe come for a year, leave for over like 1 to 2 years and come back again.
Yes. Yes, and this file lets you do that. So you can, so for example, when we merge this with our graduates, and now you can do it with the Tableau join in Tableau, so it's easier. But we classify our freshmen if they stayed and had over a 2, if they left and had over a 2, if they had under a 2 and stayed and under a 2 it left. And what we found was, of the students who graduated, 90% of them on average had stayed the first year and had over a 2.0. The other 10% had over a 2.0 and left, but had meandered their way back into the system and earned a degree. So this because it really is good as your spreadsheet is long. I guess long is the right word. It's time, but the more time you have in your spreadsheet, the more opportunities you have to see movement. Just as an example of that, I'll show you this real fast. If I take new student ID and just drop it in, here's every student. It looks kind of crazy. But then if I drop in year, so here's year, and I'm going to drop into the color. This will look ridiculous, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'll do this. I'll do department by major into the color. So here's students, and here's all the different majors you could have. So I can see right now that this student changed majors. But if I drop in my less than a 2.0 GPA, I can see a lot of them were just here one term, and you can start to track change like this too, because it's built into the system. So you can see very few dots show up very often, and you can see how many times they change their major. In fact, you could even do an analysis of the row, and you can see over here, there's no mathematical value, but if you see more than one color dot, that's how many people changed their major and what it was. So this methodology is really helpful tracking a lot of stuff over time. So again, once you build that set, it's good to go forever, or at least until your computer crashes, or you lose the disk, or the internet explodes, or an asteroid hits us all. But I'm in Ohio, so I'm safe. Tornadoes, we have lots of tornadoes. You had a question.
Yeah, in the creation of the initial spreadsheet, you started with your census.
Yeah.
Yes, come down to your student numbers.
Yeah, and I guess to make a point, to kind of talk about your point, I'm that guy when they go to the hotel room, checks it 17 times. Like, my stuff will be outside. I'm going to check it one more time. I'm sweeping. I've got mirrors, around. Like, I'm that guy. So I kind of liked the fact that we were forced to pick a date. Otherwise, you could drive yourself crazy. I mean, you literally could drive yourself crazy. So I can't tell you for a fact that some of these folks didn't do something else the next week or change their major. But it was enough. I always tell people, I'm not an optometrist, but I'm afraid to wear contact lenses. I wear glasses. But I always tell people I'm not going for necessarily 20/20 vision. I just want to make better, worse, better, better, worse, better, better, worse. I want to get us closer to the absolute truth with this information. So for our purposes, the sets and creating a better common operating picture has been really helpful. It's changed the culture of the way people think about data on campus, and the people understand it.
Sure, but I guess my question has to do with the data elements in that census, because it's certainly early on we're talking about bringing in different kinds of.
Yeah, it was all in our relational database.
Right. Okay. So did you use Tableau?
No, I would use Tableau now with the new join feature. I'd have a worksheet and another worksheet in the same workbook, and I would join them that way. This predated Tableau's ability to do that easily. I didn't have Tableau the very first sheet. I did this in pivot tables in the beginning, and so we used Access to do the initial merge for this sheet. So I'm showing you the old style too. Any other questions? Well, if there's no other questions, I appreciate your time. I will. I'll leave this back up, and again, I have smaller analog versions